While you're waiting for them to be seated, you can turn to Genesis 32 with me. Genesis 32. We'll start in verse 24, but before we get there, I think that there's some backstory that must be said to this before we can just jump straight into it. Surely, many of you, if you've been in church for any amount of time, you've heard the story of Jacob and Esau, especially if you were raised in church. That was a story that you hear all the time as a kid, right? It's one of the ones that's simple for us to put into a easy children's message for us to help explain moral values to children. But a little bit of context before we get into the story here, and we see Jacob where he's at. We have to go all the way back 20 years and see where he first was. See, before we get to this part of where Jacob is, 20 years prior, Jacob is in his house, and he's trying to manipulate his brother into selling him his birthright. He tells his brother comes in, he's starving, he's hungry. And how many of us know that sometimes when we feel like we're in need or we feel like we're desperate, we'll sell ourselves off for something desperate, for something small. And so Esau, of course, he's famished, he's starving, and Jacob says, well, listen, I'll make you this stew if you only sell me your birthright, if you give it over to me. And of course, Esau, he's not thinking, he's not in his right mind, he's just hungry. And he says, sure, you can have the birthright. I'm just so hungry, I'm about to die. Make me some food. And so Jacob makes him some food, and we see later, manipulating, deceitful, lying Jacob goes to his father Isaac, who has at this time become blind. His eyesight has failed him. And he goes to his father, and he's disguised himself as Esau, and he's wanting his father's blessing on himself. He's already put animal skins on his own arms so he would feel hairy like Esau was hairy, because in this story we see that Esau was an outdoorsman. He was somebody who was in nature a lot. He was a hunter, and Jacob was the complete opposite. He loved being in the house, and he was pretty much raised by his mother. So he didn't feel rugged like Esau felt. And he knew, I have to change how I smell. I have to change how I feel. I have to change how I look if my father is actually going to put his hands on me and bless me and give me this birthright. And ultimately we see that that's what happens. Isaac is deceived, and he gives this birthright over to the wrong son, to the younger son Jacob, who has manipulated his way into blessing. And now 20 years after all of this, Jacob has been on the run, especially from his brother, thinking that his brother would kill him for taking this birthright, for taking this inheritance that he's received. But we see that even in all the lying and manipulating and deceiving, the Lord was still with Jacob. In fact, the Lord was speaking to Jacob. Jacob was seeing visions of angels still. And you're thinking, how can this be that the Lord is interacting with the one who is a thief? With the one who would choose to lie and manipulate? But we see that this is the case. And the Lord tells Jacob to go back to the place of his fathers, and there he would make him a great nation. And so now Jacob, 20 years later, is back to where it all started. He's coming home, and he's going to have to face his brother and look him in the eyes, and he's frightened and he's scared. And it says this in 24, Jacob, right before this, has just sent his entire family and all he owns across the river. And it says this, then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. And when he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he was wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." He said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him and said, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, and he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved." Now the sun rose upon him just as it crossed over Peniel, and he was limping on his thigh. Therefore, to this day, the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew of the hip, which is on the socket of the thigh, because he touched the socket of Jacob's thigh in the sinew of the hip. We'll stop right there. It's interesting to me before all this that we see that Jacob has sent his entire family and all he has, like I said before, already in front of him. And really, he does this out of fear of his brother. Right? They're having to cross a stream here, and he's telling his family, he's telling all the servants, he says, "I know that once I cross here, I'm in Esau's territory. And I still don't know, I haven't seen him in 20 years. I don't know what's going to happen." And so in a way, him sending his family and him sending his servants was a way of him trying to almost make peace with his brother before he ever got there. Because maybe if I'm not there, maybe he will show them mercy. Maybe they'll go before me and he'll have mercy on them. But then almost out of nowhere, we see in the scriptures that this man comes and begins to wrestle with him in the middle of the night as he's waiting. And of course, we see that this isn't just any ordinary man, because an ordinary man doesn't just touch someone's hip and it's instantly dislocated. And we see that obviously Jacob even recognizes this at the end. He says, "I have seen God face to face, and yet I have survived." So we see that the Lord is the one who then touches Jacob's hip and dislocates it. I think that what's interesting is we find Jacob once more asking for blessing. Through this entire journey, we can find Jacob asking for blessing. He says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The two have been wrestling all night long. The Lord decides to touch his hip. He dislocates it. He's ready for this thing to be over. And yet Jacob is still grabbing on with everything that he says that he has. And he says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And I think that here we start to see a really interesting view of what biblical blessing actually looks like. See, we can limp and still prevail. Because is that not what the Lord told him? That you have wrestled with God and with men, and yet you have still prevailed. So we can limp and prevail at the same time, because blessing and bruising are not mutually exclusive in the realm of God. Oh, Caleb, it's going to be one of those messages. I don't like it when you don't do the ones that make me happy. This message should make you happy this morning. But remember that blessing and bruising are not mutually exclusive in the realm of God. Sometimes change hurts. And if I want to engage with God, if I decide I can wrestle with Him, then I must expect that I will be changed in the process. But I think this is what we do a lot of times. We think that we can come into this place, and we think that we can engage Him in our private time, and we think that we can stay the exact same, but He'll just change things for us. And what happens is He's so adamant about you changing, He decides He'll reach out and touch you Himself. He says, I know you don't want to change, but I'll do it myself. Before the blessing that Jacob receives here, we see that Jacob is asked this almost terrible question of what is your name? Caleb, why is that a terrible question? You have to remember that the last time that Jacob is asked this question in the story was his 20-year younger self. The last time Jacob was asked in this story, what is your name? He was 15 years old. And he stood in front of his father Isaac, who was suspicious and who already knew the power of what blessing was, and he was hesitant to give it to him. And Jacob looks at his father in the face, and when he's asked who he is, he says, I'm Esau. Bless me. And now Jacob is being asked this terrible question one more time. Because, man, if we don't serve a God of redos, and he gives a second chance, and he asks Jacob, he says, what is your name? Not because he doesn't know, but it's because I wonder if even in ourselves, how many of us begin to engage with him, and yet we have no blessings because we're never honest with him. Because here's the thing, before the blessing comes, he asks an honest question, who are you? Because the Lord is saying, I'm ready to bless you, but you haven't been very honest, have you, Jacob? You manipulated your way into everything that's blessed you to this point. It's been by your hand that you've gained all these servants and riches. Yes, you've been obedient to me, but I'm asking you to truly look at yourself. Who are you? Because you lied to your failing-eyed father. Would you lie to a stranger who wrestles with you? And I just remember reading this, and I became so gripped with the thought of how often do we miss out on his blessings because we decide to come in here and we decide to engage, we decide to go into our private time and engage, and we simply put on a mask of Esau because we think that's what deserves the blessing. Because we know in our mind that Esau is who's supposed to be blessed. So I'm supposed to look like Esau. I'm supposed to look like the firstborn. I'm supposed to have it together. I'm supposed to be this and that. Jacob wasn't the daddy's boy. He was the mama's boy. He didn't go outside. He wasn't the pride of the family. There was shame in his life for who he was. And I wonder how many of us this morning, there's literally shame in our lives simply for who we are. And the Lord is telling us this morning, you don't have to put on the animal skins. I already see through those things. His sight is not failing. But that's what we do. We'll put on the different smell. We'll put on the animal skins. We'll put on the different clothes. We'll make ourselves look some kind of way that is presentable for Him to bless us. And the whole time, He's seeing right through it. But Lord, I look like Esau. Why haven't you blessed me? We see then that if we continue, the Lord gives Jacob a new name. Again, this is a part of the change in the interaction that happens when we're engaging with the Lord. See, before, Jacob had a name that meant heel grabber. It even means replacer. There's about 15 different definitions to the Hebrew name of Jacob, so you could go down a whole list. None of them are good. But a lot of scholars like to use the heel grabber one because we see that Jacob and Esau were twins, and we see that Jacob is almost, it's this imagery of him grabbing the heel of his brother as he comes out, even from the beginning trying to take the first place. And after engaging with the Lord says, no longer will your name be heel grabber. No longer will you be the one that has to drag someone else down so that you could be elevated. How many of us do that if we're honest with ourselves? I like to make others look bad. I like to talk about others. I like to this and that, all so that I can get a higher position, also that I can be seen better, so they would be seen lower. Because if everyone else around me is seen in lower eyes, in worse eyes, then of course I will look elevated. Jacob makes this statement. He says, I've seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved. But there was still a cost. Yes, his life was preserved, but there was a cost to this interaction. The limp. The sun rose, and it says that he was limping on his thigh. He wrestles with the Lord all night long. The sun finally rises, and as he stands, and as he looks out in the direction where his family has already gone ahead of him, he begins to limp. Because he's changed my name, but he's also physically changed me. There's something different about me now. And what's different is now it's something that looks like a weakness to others. But to me it is strength, because when I see it, I know that there was an engagement. And there's too many Christians that walk around without limps because there's been no true engagement. They wanted to stay comfortable. But I'm telling you, even on Tuesday night, I was so gripped with this word for the Lord, and this is what he would ask: would you allow me to wound you? Caleb, that sounds super dark. What does that mean? Would you allow me to wound you? See, I hear a lot of emphasis on the limp if we look at this story. And I could go into a whole separate message just on the limp and this wounding. But Jacob didn't carry this limp to simply look wounded. That's not the reason that the Lord gave him this wound. The wounding is always unto something. But it's us trusting that even in the wounding, and even in the change that hurts us, and in the change we are scared of, that even in that, he is moving and operating and doing something within us. Trusting that it is on to something. Jacob, it is believed, would carry this limp for the rest of his life. But Hebrews 11:21 says this, listen. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons. And he worshiped and he leaned on top of his staff. I want to encourage you this morning, and some people that have been with me for a while have heard me make this statement, but I hope to bring some clarity to it this morning. The Lord is coming to wound you so that you would have a limp, but it isn't so that you would just look wounded to people around you. He's coming to wound you so you would lean on Him. The limp is always meant for a lean. And Jacob, till the end of his days, leaned on that staff because he couldn't walk the same after that engagement. And this morning, I'm telling you, the Lord doesn't want you to walk the same anymore. And He's saying, I'm telling you, you can lean on me, you can trust me, but first I have to wound you. But what does that wound even look like? I can promise it's most likely not an actual limp He's trying to bring you. But I can tell you it's something that you're carrying that you believe is necessary. It's something that you refuse to let go of. And I'm not even talking about something material. There's something within you, within your personality, within who you are that you've refused to let go of. Because I was just born like this. This is how mom and dad were. That's how the siblings were. That's how you name it. And I carry it and I carry it. And the Lord is reaching out His hand and He's saying, I'm tired of wrestling with you. Would you allow me to wound you? But to us, it's scary. But Lord, if you drive that thing out of me, then what do I have left? If you take away the manipulating, the lying, the cunning, the deceit, if I take all those things out of Jacob, then what do I have left? Because that's all I use to get to where I am. And instead, the Lord is saying, I'm making you into a great nation. You're not making you into a great nation. But there must be a lean on me. See, after I encounter Him, something will be hurt, but it is always unto the lean. I'm telling you that we're missing out on something supernatural because we refuse to let Him touch us. If we're being honest with ourselves, we're scared of His touch. Think about the interactions outside of even the Gospels that people have with the Lord, the fear of the Lord that is there. Think of John's interaction with Him, the coal on his lips. It's always this purifying touch. It's always this touch that is beyond what a human could do. But if we're honest with ourselves, we haven't been intimate enough for a touch like that. We haven't been intimate enough to receive a blessing that also comes with a bruising. Because now I have to feel and be inflicted. I thought the point of blessing was so that I didn't have to be inflicted. Until He places His hand on your hip, your name doesn't change. You can call yourself Christian. You can call yourself follower of Christ. But until He touches your hip, the name really hasn't changed, has it? It stayed the same because I never engaged. Jacob already knew the Lord, but he still had to wrestle with Him. Like we said earlier, Jacob is already following the guide of the Lord. He's already been listening and being obedient. He's going back into this place. The Lord has told him to go, and yet there was still a wrestle that had to take place. So don't confuse yourself this morning that in all my obedience, I've already wrestled and I'm done. But be mindful that in my obedience, He's bringing me into a place of change, and that means I have to wrestle. Because there's something within me that doesn't desire the things of God. There is still a flesh nature that is there, and I can put on the new man all I want to, but at the end of the day, if Paul had to crucify his flesh daily, then I have to crucify my flesh daily. And the Lord is saying, I'm coming to wrestle with that thing that has stricken you for years, but let me wound you. There's just something different that happens when He touches us. But man, I just think that the imagery has always been so wrong with a touch from the Lord. This imagery that we've always had of the Lord giving us a touch, reaching out His hand. I read a story like this and I think, man, what are we really asking for? We're asking for Him to engage with us, but we don't realize that there's a cost. But we want revival in our lives. We want churches in a region changed. We want our homes to be fixed. We want our marriages to look great. You name it. I want my business to work out. I want my dreams to be fulfilled. I'm doing all these things for you, Lord. And He says, great, let me wound you though. Because how does any of it truly change unless He gets involved? The wrestle is a really hard topic to talk about because it doesn't sound like this fun thing. But I'm telling you, when you begin to limp and you begin to think about what he did to you and you begin to lean and you say, I trust you more than I ever did. And I won't let go until you bless me. And I know that it takes more than just my words for me to call out and say, bless me. I know it takes you touching me too. Who this morning's just been calling out for blessing but wasn't expecting change? Who's been seeking engagement with him but has refused to change? Caleb, how much more can I change? I feel like you preach about this all the time. How much more can I be different until I look like him? How much more can I change until I walk like Jesus walked? Until people around me start to change? Until then, I'll keep on finding places in the scriptures for us that show us we need to continue to change. That show us that there's a different level. That show us that there's always something more. And I'm not telling you that it's some kind of formula. I'm just telling you that once you let everything go ahead of you and the family's gone and the possessions are gone and it's in this land that you don't know what's going to even happen to any of that, and you put your trust in the Lord already, but you haven't put the trust in the Lord for yourself yet. And you stay and you sat through the night and you said, Lord, I trust you with all these things, but I don't trust you with me. He says, I'm coming to wrestle you. Until you understand that I want to be with you and change you. Because that's what Jacob did. Will you guys stand with me this morning? I believe in the power of the Lord. And I believe that even this morning, he can change someone's name. Because you followed him for a long time, but he hasn't given you a name change. Maybe you haven't followed him for a long time. Maybe this is all new language for you. He has something different for you. He has a different name for you. No longer will you be called deceitful, liar, manipulative, the one who could look at their own family in the face and cheat them. But instead, the Lord says, I would even choose someone like you. And I would change your name. Because one interaction, one encounter. But man, I'm not talking about these superficial encounters that we love to preach about. I'm talking about an encounter that wounds. An encounter that pierces me in the heart. And I'm on constant Holy Spirit life support because of it. I just can't live the same anymore. There's a blessing that the Lord wants to give you, but He's asking you a question first. Who are you? What's your name? Not the mask that you put on in here. You've asked me for blessing, but you did it with your church face. Pull that one off. You asked it with the face that you present yourself to your work friends, to your family with. In fact, I would even say that the Lord in this moment is saying, how about you take off the face and approach me like a man, like a woman? You want blessing, but you've hidden yourself away. For Jacob, it was 20 years. How long has it been for us? We can't deceive him. Yet he still chooses to bless us if we would simply allow. That hurts a lot of theologies, that sometimes it's even us having to allow the blessing. That sometimes he won't even move on a blessing until we give permission. We let him engage with us and wound us.